Good evening, everyone. This is Mick Stott, and I'd like to welcome you to another yet another broadcast with our No to NATO, No to War series. And of course, we held our own event as the Workers' Party of Britain in London last Saturday, and we had some big numbers there that were very interested in the guest speakers that we had, because we had guest speakers representing Russia, representing Belarus, representing China. We had friends of China, and from our perspective, it's very, very important that we remember some of the basics. Really, when we are celebrating victory in Europe, I think people seem to have forgotten that Russia were one of our greatest allies. If it wasn't for Russia getting involved, then that would have been a far more drawn out situation. I think we're in agreement of that. Now, I personally spoke at the event on Saturday, along with a lot of the other speakers from the Workers' Party. So let's just take a couple of moments to take a look at some of the things that I was talking about.
Mother, father, son, daughter, what it's like to live with someone who comes back from war with post-traumatic stress disorder. The ripples are created. But there's no point being either one of those if you end up in prison. And bizarrely, the last time I checked through Viper's statistics, 13% of the prison population are veterans. And of course, what generally happens is what happened in America, where we had anything up to 22 veterans per day committing suicide. That's a horrendous number.
And of course, that was just a whistle-stop tour of some of the things that we talked about, because I specialize in mental health, and it was natural that I was going to reflect on the impact to community and family and what war does. We're seeing that and witnessing that as we watch ethnic cleansing going on in Gaza as we speak. And of course, there isn't even a community standing wherever this war machine has laid itself down. The net result of that can only be destruction, because war leads to war. It's as simple as that. Of course, the Workers' Party doesn't make us pacifists. It just makes us people that would much rather negotiate a situation and find and come to a conclusion that serves all, as opposed to feeding the corporations that make money from war, that then tend to lobby governments and do nothing less than control them through corporatization. But that's a different story. We've got two great guests tonight. Our first guest is a researcher, an author, and a political commentator, and his name is George Szamuely. I hope I pronounced that right, George.
Not really. Szamuely.
Szamuely, thank you, George. I mean, there's a few people get my surname wrong. I can't work out why, because it's quite simple. At least I've got an excuse, because yours looks a little bit more complex.
Yeah, a little bit more. It's not that complicated.
Yeah, exactly. So, George, welcome. And we had our victory day, and I know there was a victory day that was held in Hungary. Was Russia represented at any of those official events from your perspective?
No, Russia wasn't. However, one has to differentiate, I think, Hungary from many of the other countries of Eastern Europe, in that Hungary has made no attempt to revise history and suggest that the incoming Red Army was an invading army, that it came in to enslave the Hungarian people, and that it was a really terrible thing when the Red Army came and liberated Hungary from fascist rule. So the Hungarians, while they're certainly no great fan of the Russians, and they're certainly very anti-communist, however, are appreciative of the Red Army. So there have been no attempts here at all over the years to desecrate any of the Red Army memorials. They're all there in Freedom Square. You see a major memorial there thanking the Red Army, the saviors of the Red Army. And there's, of course, a very famous monument to the liberators on Gellert Hill. So the Hungarian authorities have never done anything at all to desecrate these memorials. They've made no attempt to desecrate the cemeteries of the Red Army. So I think that's very different from what's happened in other countries in Eastern Europe, where they've rather forgotten the history there, such as particularly in the Czech Republic, and of course, needless the Baltic states, where it was the Red Army that came in and liberated them from fascist rule. And the way they presented that this was somehow an act of enslavement, as if there was any other force available that could have liberated them from fascism. And it couldn't. There was no other alternative. It was the Red Army, and only the Red Army that could have done it. So here I think Hungary has maintained a very civilized and courteous attitude towards the Russians and the Russian liberators of Hungary.
That's great to hear. I mean, certainly they were, Britain, as far as we were concerned, there was never going to be an invite to Russia, but they didn't invite it, which is quite incredible. What they did, in fact, was invite Ukraine. I mean, from your perspective, how much of a perversion of history is that?
Well, it is a perversion because the problem that arose following the Nazi invasion of the Soviet Union, of course, one has also to remember, and this is often forgotten, that the Nazis had allies among the European states, many of the European states that are now currently members of NATO. So the French took part in the Nazi invasion, the Italians took part in the Nazi invasion, the Spanish took part, the Hungarians took part, the Romanians took part. So there were allies of Nazi Germany in that invasion. So that's one thing. The other thing is that during the invasion, a number of the national minorities or the national groups that comprised the Soviet Union took the Nazi invasion as the opportunity to vent their murderous, sadistic, psychopathic hatred for the Russians and to go on an absolute murderous rampage against the Russians. And that, of course, applies very much to the Ukrainians who seized on the opportunity provided by the Nazi invasion to conduct mass killings of Jews, Poles, and of course Russians. And of course that applies to the Balts, who are today among the most Russophobic, rabidly Russophobic peoples in Europe. And these were the very people who conducted the worst kind of mass killings of Russians. So the one national group in the USSR that didn't collaborate in any way, shape, or form with the Nazi invaders, no collaboration whatsoever, were the Russians. Everyone else collaborated, but the Russians didn't. And so if you're going to go and say somehow the Ukrainians were on our side, but not the Russians, well, the Russians were absolutely, unalterably determined to destroy the Germans, then that is a perversion of history. And one has to remember that Stalin himself, at the end of World War II, he famously raised the glass to the Russian people. He said, I raise a glass to the Russian people, the greatest nation of the USSR, because it is the one nation that, they didn't like the communists, Stalin declares, they didn't like the communists, but it was the one nation that nonetheless didn't collaborate in any way with the Nazi occupiers. It says that is why the Russian people are the greatest nation of the USSR.
Yes, and of course, one thing that became very apparent when we considered Ukraine as a nation and a war entity was the fact that it essentially contains Nazi elements to this, which is rather ironic when we were celebrating Victory in Europe Day. The thing is that the British media are currently towing the line of our government. Why do you think they're doing this?
Well, the British media who always do this. The British media, and this I think is true also of most of the media in Europe are peddling the line of war. They want war. They don't want any possibility of bringing this war in Ukraine to an end. So what they're doing is they're essentially mobilizing public opinion, but in Britain, obviously, but it's true in other countries, in France and in Germany, to mobilize opinion and preparing it for war with Russia. And it's a quite extraordinary thing that Russia, that poses no threat to anyone at all, in certainly in Western Europe, is being treated as if it's an enemy state. And you just pick up the any of the British papers, and they're presenting a ridiculous, hysterical accounts of how the British people have to get ready to fight a war with Russia. They don't quite explain why. There's a suggestion, obviously, that Russia is going to invade Britain or anyone else in Europe. That's a very dubious argument. So then there's a second argument, which is, quite a serious one, which is that somehow there's an obligation on the part of the British and other Europeans to go to war against Russia on Ukraine's behalf. That somehow Ukraine is fighting a war on behalf of European civilization or Western civilization or European values or whatever, and that Russia is the enemy. And this is being conducted, this is a deliberate propaganda campaign, obviously being whipped up by European governments, trying to justify exorbitant military budgets, but they're using the media in order to scare the public and whip up this fake, fraudulent, anti-Russian hysteria.
And of course, I have a basic tenet that if you're, and I can see behind you, you've got numerous books there, George.
Yes.
And I'm a great believer that if your television is bigger than your library, you're probably going to get led down a path or two. Now, do you think the British public actually believe in their narrative? And if so, why?
I don't think the British public buys into it. But there's it's amazing what you can do if you get people sufficiently frightened and agitated and hysterical. All it would require is one false flag event, one suggestion that, oh, Russia used nuclear weapons in Ukraine, Russia let off a dirty bomb in the streets of London, just one event. And the public is absolutely excited and delighted to be going to war. So it's very dangerous when you play this game of whipping up hysteria, because then it becomes quite easy to just manufacture an opportunity to get the people to go to war. The problem is, of course, that the British people, and which is true also of many people in Europe, they really don't know anything about war. They have no idea what war is like. I mean, it's they have no idea what the horrors of a battlefield. They haven't fought any wars for a long time. So you tell them, oh, it's the Russians. We shouldn't be too difficult to defeat the Russians. They're more likely to believe such nonsense now than they would have 40, 50 years ago, when there were plenty of World War II veterans still around. But there are so few World War II veterans, almost none around anymore. No one with any real living memory of what war is like. So the notion that it's actually, we can get by without too many casualties can easily take hold, largely because of the irresponsible media and these clownish generals who are always writing their columns and op-eds in the Telegraph and the Times about how, I went to Sandhurst and, I was at this regiment and that regiment. And, I can see the Russians, we can take the Russians. So you have all these former military types, all now, of course, on the payroll as consultants to the arms manufacturers. They're also contributing to this hysteria and the suggestion that a war would really be pretty easy to win.
It's very interesting, isn't it? Because certainly as a soldier, what you start to realize is that the idea of something and the reality of it are two completely different things. I don't need to tell you that, George, because you're very right. We're surrounded by sea, which actually makes it a little bit harder to reach us in some ways. Whereas if you look at some of the other countries within Europe, it's simply crossing the border. So thank you, George. Don't go too far away because we will be coming back to you for some more questions. Okay. It's time now to talk to our other guest for the evening, Dean O'Brien. And Dean, you're based in Britain, aren't you? But you travelled all the way to Pridnestrovia?
Yeah.
To talk at the Victory Day?
Yeah.
Yeah. And many viewers might not have heard of it. It's a new one on me, to be honest. Tell us about it. And how did Victory Day went there? How did that go?
Oh, that went well. I mean, so the Pridnestrovia is a little slip of land sort of trapped between Moldova and Ukraine. When the Soviet Union broke up in 1991, there was a war in Moldova, and this part of Moldova wanted to stay as part of the Soviet Union, so they gained independence. So I've been going there for the past 3 years. This year I went there, and Victory Day was spectacular. It was fabulous. And then I got detained by authorities in Moldova at the airport on the way back, trying to return back to the UK. So what they did was does
that generally happen, or is that something that, because we've had on previous programs a number of other people that have been arrested and detained in some ways? Is this a new thing for you, Dean, or is this sort of a regular thing?
This is new. I mean, I kind of thought that it might happen at one point, but at this time it did come as a little bit of a shock. I mean, first of all, they said it was just a random passport check, and then I got asked a few questions about where I'd been, and then when I said I'd been in Pridnestrovia, they decided to take my baggage off the plane that had already been loaded. So my flight was going in about 2 hours. Check-in opened 3 hours before, and I was one of the first people. So they detained me for the full 3 hours, really. Well, they took my baggage off the plane, opened it, asked me numerous questions, interrogated me. Usual kind of methods they use, where they switch you from different rooms from one to another. It's all mind games, really. And then they open my suitcase, ask for my phone. They take your phone off you. They take your phone out of the room, bring it back an hour later. So they've been through all your photographs, everything else. But yeah, and then I was eventually allowed to go, but I just caught my flight. They let me go about 5 minutes before the flight was boarding. So that was that, really.
It's interesting, isn't it? I mean, from my perspective, that's quite a tactic to use to scare people off. If you're the journalist that you are, and you're objective, that's the last thing anyone wants in some of these spaces, yeah?
Oh, of course, yeah. I mean, I'm also quite concerned about the tactics they're using now, where they're saying, give me your handset, I want to check your phone. I mean, surely there must be some sort, this has got to be regulated, because you can't just randomly go up to somebody in an airport and say, give me your phone, I want to check it. Surely, if you've got previous form for like terrorism, or you're a high risk, or there were warning markers against you, then fair enough. But if you're just a freelancer, a photographer, or somebody going to a region where they just disagree with, they shouldn't be able to do things like this.
Well, it's interesting because, one of the things that I started to learn was common law. And of course, there is law across Europe that's very, very similar in a number of ways. And in reality, someone has to have a purpose, reasonable suspicion of a crime before they can do those things. But your average person, Dean, wouldn't even say no to it. You know,
No.
because it's a bully tactic, isn't it?
Of course it is, and you've got to remember you're in a foreign country. You're trying to return home. Out of like the 7 officers that were there was only one that spoke English, and the other one was broken English. So they do kind of throw you off a little bit. I mean, luckily for me, I've been travelling to Eastern Europe including Ukraine, everywhere else, for 15 years. So it's not the first time I've been pulled into what's known as the naughty room, where they like to pull you to one side and put you through your paces. So it is what it is. I mean, they opened up my case. They just pulled out bits and pieces. What are these? What's this photograph? You know, and I'm just like, well, you know, it is what it is. You know, and their argument was, what they said was, I'd gone to Moldova. You see, to get into Pridnestrovia, there's 2 ways you can get in. You can either get in through Odessa in Ukraine, which is a bit of a no-go for me because I'm on a wanted list there, and the other option's Moldova. So what they were saying was, because I was a photographer, I should have sought press credentials through them, but that would have got me instantly denied, because they're not going to grant me press credentials to go into an annexed area of their region under Russian control. It's just not going to happen. I got press credentials from the Pridnestrovia media company, and that was all official. So it's one of them. I don't think I can return now. I think it's one of them where if I turned up, my passport would be flagged. They'd pull me to one side. They'd say, "You're here to get to the spot, aren't you?" I'll say, "Yeah," and they'll just turn me around and send me back.
Yeah,
so,
you end up on some sort of watch list, yeah.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I mean, they did give me some paperwork. I had to put about 7 different signatures on it, on all different parts of it. That was all in Moldovan, so I didn't even know what I was signing.
Yeah.
As soon as I get the chance, I'll run it through and get it translated and find out exactly what it says. But I think it's fair to say I can't return there again now.
Yeah, because you could be even signing up to some sort of exclusion agreement.
Yeah. So I'll get this looked at when I get the chance.
And of course, I was chatting to George about the situation in the UK, where Britain didn't invite Russia; they invited Ukraine. I mean, what do you think about that in terms of the fact that we were fighting fascism under Hitler? What is your perspective on that, Dave?
I think it's disgraceful, and I'm really embarrassed with the way that our country is dealing with all of this. Our country is probably in one of the worst situations it's ever been in, and here we are offering massive agreements to Ukraine, massive promising to send foot soldiers there. It's just unbelievable. And Ukraine has become a dead weight. I mean, I heard it described as like a suitcase with no handle. Nobody really knows what to do with it anymore. It's just a mess. But I just really wish that the UK would pull out and concentrate more on the people here. There's just so much tension in the country at the moment. We've got problems with stabbings, the cost of living, heating, eating, everything is going through the roof. Drivers are getting penalised. This country needs sorting out. Why are we focusing on Ukraine? I just don't get it. And the fact that they had Ukrainian soldiers marching on the streets of Britain, unbelievable. I've been going there for 15 years. I know the majority of them support hard right, fascist views, and here we are having them marching on our streets. Unbelievable.
Absolutely, it is, and of course, you know, from my perspective on that, Dean, I think there's a much bigger plan. I think that as long as the likes of Keir Starmer prefer the workings of Davos to his own parliament, that tells you that there are other people involved in the running of our country outside of our awareness. But that's a completely separate issue. Dean, we will come back to you in a moment. Thanks a lot for your input. Don't go too far away.
Okay.
And let's talk to George again. Now, of course, George, Dean wasn't the only person that got arrested. We had Shay Bowes that was detained when he got off a plane in Bucharest. Have you ever had any similar experiences to Dean or Shay?
Well, I personally haven't. But I do fear what might happen should I return to the UK, because I've heard a number of stories of people who are British citizens, as I am, who have had these kinds of run-ins at British airports. I mean, took his computer away, took his phone away, and then we had Kit Clarenberg. The same thing happened to him. So I do worry about that. And it is the case that once you've created this atmosphere that we're supposedly at war with Russia, even though we're not at war with Russia. I mean, that's an important thing to remember. We're not at war with Russia. Then that provides some kind of a vague justification of suspecting almost anyone who may have contributed to RT, may have visited Russia. The sort of the vague idea that, well, maybe he's working for, and so maybe we can go through his computer and through his phone and see what we can drag out of them, some contacts and, and all sorts of information. So that's what happens when you create this atmosphere of war, even though there is no war. I mean, there is no war with Russia, but they've created this atmosphere whereby somebody who, may have friends in Russia, visited Russia, somehow may be colluding with the enemy.
Of course, and I would be really interested if you were going to get yourself arrested. What do you think you'd have to do that, from your experience? Because there's clearly some sort of tick list, right?
Well, I think that what you have to do. I mean, if they can find that you have worked for organizations that they think has some connections with Russia or connections with the Kremlin, that you could get yourself arrested, and then they can, you're at Heathrow, and then they can start interrogating you, and you don't really have too many options. You actually have to cooperate with their interrogation. I mean, they can indeed take your computer away. I mean, that's not that's not something they go to a court or anything, to get a warrant or anything else. They can just simply take your computer away. So now, let's take the example of Che Bose. What was it that he had done wrong? I mean, he's a journalist. He came to Romania to cover the presidential election, and he was arrested and thrown out of the country. Why? What's the reason? I mean, there's nothing at all other than he has done work for RT. Well, so what? Well, I mean, again, are we at war with Russia? No. So why shouldn't any journalist do some work for RT or anyone else? But that's the atmosphere that one lives in. So I think these days, when I travel, I don't take my computer with me. I leave my computer at home. I leave my phone at home. Just get a some rudimentary, buy a very cheap rudimentary phone. Yeah, absolutely do not do it, because if they go into your phone, they're going to extract all of your contacts, and then they're going to put that on the list. So travel without any contact, and you have to do without your computer for a few days.
Yeah, and it ends up being quite a sinister experience. I knew people within the freedom movement that even during COVID were having their computers taken off them and their phones and things. So that's not news to me. But I don't believe we live in a democracy anymore in the UK anyway. That's my concept of it. It's easily palpable. Thank you, George. You've been marvelous again. Let's go back to Dean, can we? So, Dean, why do you think our government is trying to distort history when it comes to the Second World War? What's your take on that?
Because it suits the current narrative, doesn't it? God forbid they should actually give Russia any form of praise. And that's what it comes down to. Russia can't do anything right in the current government's eyes. And they're obviously trying to brainwash the general public. Look how they banned RT News. People aren't getting both sides of this war, and this is what they want. They need to see both sides to have their own opinion, really, and they're not allowed to. And it's as simple as that, really. It doesn't suit the narrative. They want to spend the taxpayers' money supporting Ukraine.
Yeah, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, Ukraine has been the biggest money laundering exercise. When you look at the benefactors of war and where all that the money goes, then for me that's nothing less than money laundering. I mean, why do you think our political class and the media, and why do you think they're distorting the truth about the mass sacrifices that Russia made during World War II?
It's about, they want the general public on side. If the public in the UK started kicking off, doing demonstrations in massive numbers going against Ukraine, that would really put the government on a back foot, and they can't afford to have that. So they need to keep ploughing this money into Ukraine, and they need the general public behind them, basically, of which it's fair to say the majority of them naively are. I mean, I'm really annoyed with Trump, for example, because when he came into power, I really thought for the first few days he was really going to put an end to this war. And he did actually have it in the palm of his hand. When he had that kickoff with Zelensky on TV that we all saw, where he told him he doesn't hold any cards, at that moment, he should have said, from this moment in time, I'm stopping all financial and military support. And I genuinely think if he'd done that, they would have been able to end the conflict in a few days. But whilst that money's pouring in, that war will keep going. Zelensky will keep the war going. And his cronies that are all benefiting from it, because the people of Ukraine aren't benefiting from this war, that's for sure. And that was the price they pay, you know. But then again, they got into bed with America in 2014 when the Maidan started and America got in there. And it's like what they always say. The only place you get free trees is in a mousetrap. And they've fallen for it now. And America have got them hook, line and sinker. They've got this minerals deal. America are going to have a massive stake in Ukraine because what do they owe them? 350 billion? Something like that.
Crazy. Absolutely crazy. Thank you, Dean. We'll come back to you in a moment again. So, George, if I can ask you, just basically, if you could sum up the importance of Victory Day in remembering the Soviet sacrifices against Hitler's fascism, how would you sum it up?
Well, ultimately, you have to say that that the war was decided on the Eastern Front. I mean, there's no ands, ifs, and buts about it. The war was decided on the Eastern Front. There was no way in hell that the Allies would have been able to launch their invasion in June the 6th, 1944, without the German army already having been crushed on the Eastern Front. So that was recognized more or less by by the generation after World War II. You just simply couldn't deny it. But as the years have gone by and as memories fade, and the World War II generation passes from the scene, a massive distortion of history has been accomplished. This, of course, has been helped along by the new members of the EU and NATO, particularly Poland, the Czech Republic, the Baltic states, who have used the platform provided by the EU and NATO to continue to spread anti-Russian propaganda. But the other thing one also has to remember is that a plan to push Russia out of Europe, to crush Russia, is long-standing. I mean, there was nothing really new about that. I mean, Hitler knew that he could get an alliance of European states propelled by the need to push Russia out of Europe altogether. He was right to assume that he could accomplish that coalition. So, and because there had been, even before Hitler, movements within Europe to try to push Russia out. But what happened because of the Cold War, the West had to accept something it really didn't want to accept, which was the consequence of World War II, which was that the Soviet Union now had a presence in Eastern Europe. It had a military alliance of states in Eastern Europe. This was a direct result of the invasion of the Soviet Union. So the West had to accept this until 1991. And the moment that came about, the moment Gorbachev kind of tossed away the Soviet Union, everything the Soviet Union accomplished, the moment it happened, the West did exactly what you would have expected them to do. They began a march to the east and to push Russia out of Europe. They expanded NATO immediately. That started right away. And the goal of inducting Ukraine in NATO, that didn't start in 2008 when NATO said Ukraine will be in NATO. That started in 1991. That plan of using Ukraine against Russia started in 1991. They're using all of the East European states, all of the former allies of the Soviet Union against Russia. That all started in 1991. So, you can see that what happened during World War II on the Eastern Front is part of a long-standing battle that Russia is continually waging against Western incursions, and that is why Russia is so adamant on the issue of Ukraine membership in NATO, and why Russia is so adamant that there needs to be a new Helsinki 2.0, a new security conference in Europe, to ensure that this cannot happen again, that there cannot be yet another European American coalition invading Russia.
George, that's marvelous, and I would like to thank you for being a very, very informative guest. And I have no doubt we'll be seeing you again at some point and some time in the future. Yeah.
Sure. Thank you very much.
Thank you for being with us tonight. Now, if I could go back to Dean. So, Dean, can I ask you the same question? If you could sum up the importance of Victory Day and remembering the Soviet sacrifices against Hitler's fascism, how would you sum it up?
We have to remember that 27 million Soviet people gave their lives fighting against fascism, and we also have to remember that it's such an important thing in Eastern Europe because every single family was affected. Every single family lost somebody, lost a relative, and I'd like to see it taught more in British schools in the curriculum. So regardless of what's going on politically in the world now, you can't take away what the Soviet people done for us all. So I have to educate my children about it. They understand, but why is it their friends don't know and other people? People just presume, it was the British and Americans that liberated the Jews from Auschwitz. It wasn't. It was the Soviet Red Army. So I think we need some sort of honesty and truthfulness about what really happened in the Second World War.
Thank you, Dean. You've been a marvellous guest, again, very, very informative, and it's always nice to hear different perspectives on things. I think information is fundamental for people to be able to come to an informed decision or conclusion. So thanks for being with us tonight, and I have no doubt that we'll be seeing you at some point in the future as well.
Yeah, definitely.
What I learned from my experience on Saturday was it was very interesting listening to the Russian speaker, the Belarus speaker. We also had the Friends of China, and getting different perspectives. One of the things I used to do when I was serving was I would watch the UK mainstream news and I would compare it to another mainstream outlet such as Al Jazeera. It never ceased to amaze me that we had two totally different takes on the same event happening. And it was very useful because for me, for anyone to come to a balanced conclusion as an analyst, you learn that you must triangulate your information because there's always going to be different variations of a truth. And there's going to be the truth based on who's telling the story as well. Of course, I think it would be very remiss of us to forget what the Russians did during World War II, even though some people might want you to forget those. Because a very wise man said that if we don't learn from our lessons in the past, we're always going to be in danger of repeating them. So I would like to thank our two guests tonight. It's been marvelous that we've got their perspectives on Russia and its involvement and how, by not inviting Russia to any celebrations, we draw a line in the sand for some reasons and have clearly forgotten the sacrifice that did take place and the collaboration that ensured freedom within Europe. My name is Mick Stott, and I would like to thank everyone for watching this tonight. I hope it's been very informative for you guys, and I hope you join us on the next No2Nato, No to War broadcast.